I think this follows very well on Professor Ravitch's talk. I want to make three quick points. My first one is if you look at, and I'm talking about religious discrimination or the extent of religious freedom for Muslim Americans. And I think if you look from a structural point of view, and I think this is true for anti-Jewish discrimination as well. From a structural point of view, I think we have very strong protections for freedom of religion still in America. If we look at our laws, our policies, what our courts do, enforcement mechanisms, the vast majority of opinion among elected officials, we have strong support for Muslims exercising their freedom of religion. Indeed, if you ask many American Muslims, that's one of the huge attractions of America. And indeed, many Muslims feel that they have more freedom to practice their religion, Islam, the way they want to, than they would even in many Muslim majority countries around the world. So in that regard, we could have an argument, and maybe if the professor and I had a chance, Professor Ravitch, we could talk about the Supreme Court holding on the travel ban and whether that was an exception to what I've just said. And that would be an interesting discussion, but we don't have time for that today. That's an interesting point. But I think by and large, this is true about the structural. But if we look at what I would call kind of cultural freedom of religion, what is people's ability to practice religion freely and not feel animus from the rest of society, not have discriminatory actions taken against them. Yeah, maybe you can get legal redress if you bring a lawsuit and so on, but that's not available to many people. What is the cultural state of freedom of religion? And that's a very, very different story for Muslim Americans. And it's very interesting. I study kind of 9/11 and what happened after 9/11. It's both from a cultural, legal, policy standpoint, and on many different fronts. If you look at the polling of the popularity of Islam among Americans in the years after 9/11, it really didn't change all that much in the first 4 to 5 years after 9/11. A majority of Americans viewed Islam and Muslims favorably. And while those religions Islam would get lower rankings than Judaism and Christianity and so on, it was still, above a majority rating. The thermometer, when you do thermometer polls, it was still generally considered favorable. But this really eroded towards the end of the first decade of the century, even though there weren't really any subsequent large-scale kind of Al-Qaeda attacks. You would have thought it would have been the popularity would have dropped steeply after 9/11, and then maybe would have come back, rebounded, because there, nothing like a 9/11, fortunately, has happened again. So what happened? Why? And then what we did see is a very sharp erosion in this polling, going right to today, where Islam has been viewed more and more disfavorably by the majority of Americans. Indeed, ratings for popularity of Islam among the American public has actually fallen below atheism. If you look at the polling from the Pew Research Center and Gallup and so on. And why did that happen? And a couple of reasons. First, I think it's part and parcel of the disaffection of kind of the white, non-college educated population that we have seen that has given rise to kind of this populism that President Trump helped ride into office in America. And that has a lot of complicated reasons behind it that, again, we don't have time to go into. But I think animus against Muslims was was partially caused by this general trend of disaffection. You have the rise of Obama and the election of our first African-American, first minority president, which was definitely perceived by this same population as a threat, a fear of white America, that it was losing, white Christian America, that it was essentially losing political power. And you had this rise of nationalistic thinking. And if you think about, white nationalism and its principles, Muslim Americans, were seen as the other on many, many different axes, usually first, second, or third generation immigrants, so connection with foreign countries, the non-white, generally, of course, there's some white American Muslims, but not very many, non-Christian, of course, and then this linkage to the possible security threat. So almost a quadfecta of grievance from this population against the Muslim American population. And then I think it was exacerbated by two things that were happening in the latter part of the 20-aughts, which was, a number of these homegrown, either Al-Qaeda or ISIS attacks. We're all familiar, whether it was Fort Hood, the Boston Marathon, New York City subway attempted attack, San Bernardino, I think would be 2015, which very unfortunately were conducted by either Muslim Americans, usually Muslim Americans, and even though during that same time we were seeing a rise in similar homegrown attacks by white nationalists, the media attention and so on was latched onto, and it was then that this anti-Islamic sentiment really started to take off. I think a second factor of why this happened is really the failures of the US war efforts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the continuing images in the media of violence coming to American people, and this linkage of the Middle East, Islam, and these wars with violence, and then violence against the American soldiers there. And then thirdly, this very interesting, very unfortunate growth of almost a cottage industry of Islam haters, official Islam haters, documented very well in the report Fear Inc. And these were speakers, book authors, people making videos, TV commentators, foundations, and then even spawning grassroots organizations that had their principal core of undermining and rising hatred against Muslims, against Islam, and so on, which again led to this growth in anti-Islamic sentiment, anti-Islam prejudice. So where are we now? And I'll quickly finish up. In some ways, it's interesting. During the Trump years, in many ways, I feel like this anti-Islamic sentiment has plateaued. Now, saying it's plateaued isn't really necessarily that good. Our number of COVID cases is plateauing, but it's plateauing at an extremely high level. So it's not like things are getting better, but they are essentially, in some ways, calming down. I think a couple of reasons. First of all, our nation is obsessed with the kind of chaos and unorthodoxy of Trump and the Trump administration and its ways of governing. Obviously, we have other huge heated issues. We've really seen a sharp decline in the number of homegrown cases, violent incidents by Muslim Americans, and that's a very good thing. The number of incidents inspired by the Al-Qaeda, ISIS ideologies, driven and arrests have driven almost close to zero in the last couple months, whereas they had really increased in like 2015, 16, 17. So that is a good thing. I think the destruction of the ISIS caliphate and the reduction in the internet talk and messaging coming into America and maybe inspiring certain people has also been very beneficial. And again, that doesn't mean this is made life Pollyannish for Muslim Americans living in the United States currently. I think all of that animus and problems that I discussed still exist. It is very, very harsh and difficult to deal with for many of the reasons that Professor Ravitch was saying about anti-Semitism, and is deeply unfortunate. You know, I'm trying to make a nonpartisan observation, but this is my observation about this election. We talked about the structural and the cultural. I think really what is at stake coming up and for the future of America really is whether that the structural factors allowing for freedom of religion for Muslim Americans would truly begin to erode if we don't have a substantial change. You know, the concern would be, of course, that the idea of freedom of religion would be freedom of religion for some, for the majority, for the people in power. So freedom of religion for Christians, Catholics, maybe, and Jews who have a lot of political power and clout, but not for others who are seen as unpopular, a threat, the other, by much of the majority population. And that, of course, would be a grave threat to human rights and civil liberties in our country. So I'll leave it at that.